WLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from New Haven, Connecticut, and streaming live at www.newhavenindependent.org.
Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. Speaking of headlines, did you hear the news about the pornographic bookie joint that was discovered to be operating in the basement of the old New Haven Colony Historical Society, run by the ghosts of John Davenport and Theophilus Eaton? Wait, you didn't hear about that? Well, some people might call that fake news. Seems there's been a lot of that going around lately. And to be clear, we fact-check it. We did fact-check it, and there is no pornographic bookie joint operating in the basement of the old New Haven Colony Historic Society run by the ghosts of John Davenport and Theophilus Eaton. But there is a lot of good stuff going on in the building, which we now call the New Haven Museum. Stuff like an event scheduled for Wednesday, February 20th called Fake News. Citizens, arm yourselves. Longtime Real News journalist Susan Campbell will be the featured speaker at that event, at which she intends to, quote, deconstruct contemporary news coverage. Today, she's joining us on WNHH FM's Dateline for a preview, and she's joining us on phone because of the weather. We usually screw this up at our old-fashioned radio station, but she is on phone rather than the studio, and her picture's up there on the Facebook Live. And Susan Campbell, thank you so much for joining us remotely.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're there. It's working. And I'm glad you also didn't have to drive down from Hartford in the snow. I was feeling guilty picturing you like getting slammed by a tractor trailer, and that would have been a terrible Real News headline.
What a beautiful picture. I have to say, in your intro, because it's you, I'm thinking, oh my God, is that true? And then you get to the ghost part. And once you hit the ghost, I thought, okay, I can get offline and not worry that I've missed something.
And I also want to
Don't lie, Paul. Don't do that.
I also want to thank Yellow Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, Susan Campbell, you are coming in person to New Haven next week, and you're going to be talking about fake news and talking about how we can arm ourselves against fake news. So this is the last session in a year-long initiative by the Connecticut Humanities. Fake News, Is It Real? Actually, I think I spoke in one of those panels. But in any case, you're a journalist yourself. You've worked how many years now? How many decades, I mean, Susan?
Shut up, Paul. No,
no, it's okay. I got 4 decades on me.
Actually, I'm in my 40th year right now.
Yeah, me too. All right. And you've been most of the time at the Hartford Courant, Susan?
Yes, a large part of the time. And I haven't been there full-time since 2012, but I still freelance for them.
And you wrote a great column that everybody reads. And what did you do in your early years there? What kind of beats did you have?
I worked in features. I came from the Wichita, then Eagle Beacon, now the Beacon? No, now the Eagle.
What happened to the Beacon?
Section.
The light went out?
They shot it. They turned it off.
Cost cutting. They had to turn off the Beacon.
When I worked there, it was such a hard name to say. Hi, this is Susan Campbell of the Eagle Beacon. It does not roll off the tongue.
You're right. I would have gone with Beacon Eagle.
Yeah, like Begs and Eagles. I never got it right.
Bacon egg sandwich, yeah. Okay, and then you came, you did features in the Current. And so what else did you do? You also teach now, don't you, Susan?
I do. I teach. I'm on faculty at University of New Haven. I teach journalism there.
Mm-hmm.
Business is booming. Yeah.
So you have a good perspective sort of on multiple fronts about what's happening with fake news. You have to have your students not do it and recognize it. And you also practice real news. So what is the message? Your message here, because deconstruct is a word that ever since I was in college I decided I'll never understand. What does it mean that you're going to actually deconstruct fake news? You can tell us how it happens and what we should do about it?
I think in academia we like to use that word as well as pedagogy, and I'm not sure I know what either one means.
I think that's when you teach kids stuff, maybe. But I think deconstruct is like when you tear stuff apart, but it has this patina of there is no real truth, and the deconstructionist said everything is relative to how you're experiencing it at the moment. And then, you go down such a rabbit hole that you kind of forget. You
It
kind of
is
end
a
up in
rabbit
fake
hole.
news.
So far, let's recap. You've lied and gone down a rabbit hole. You have to stop this. What I want to talk about on the 20th is a little bit of the history of fake news. This is not the first time we've talked about fake news or that people have accused the media of fake news. And then a large part of how people who maybe aren't trained in journalism, how they can do their own research. I think we have to talk more about media literacy than we have in the past. And when I think about it, I think of join with me in the days when you could go to your doctor and think you were all set. You could take what your doctor said and move on. And now we've become more health consumers where we shop around, we do a little bit of research. In the same way, we need to approach our media consumption, that we can't just take broadcloth what we're seeing. And you know
That's
that,
such a
and I
great
know
example
that, but
you
I think
gave.
some people.
That's such a great example, Susan, because we always were sure the doctor was telling us the truth, and one
Oh,
doctor didn't have all the answers. But now with the internet,
exactly.
we can get very good information from other people, but also a lot of junk that could kill us. And
Well,
we used to believe Walter
exactly.
Cronkite, or God forbid, the Hartford Courant, was telling us the truth is the only media thing in town. And often they were. And then when the internet came, we got a lot of other information, some of which was nonsense and some of which was another perspective that was kind of helpful.
And I think in a weird way, we took that same attitude as we took in what the New Haven Register, what the Hartford Courant was saying. And we may have hated them, but they told the truth. We listened to Uncle Walter on CBS. Then we moved to the internet and we continue to take in, oh, yes, that must be true. I saw it on the web, and goober.com is not a news site. So you can't necessarily swallow it all whole. And I'm not sure people understand that. And I don't mean to make it sound like they're uneducated, but
Oh, it's hard
we
to get good
hear,
information, especially medical.
yeah.
But Susan, do you
Oh,
think
yeah.
we were always told the truth by Walter Cronkite and the Hartford Courant?
I'm going to say yes for the Hartford
Wow.
Courant, and everyone else lied. No, of course not.
Wow.
Everybody makes mistakes. People do come to news coverage with their own biases. As a journalist, you're trained to put that aside. But even word choice, I understand where people think what they're getting is completely biased. It's maybe not as biased as they think. But the Current was a Federalist paper from the get-go. The Current was where people went to get their revolutionary news. And that meant that any news about the monarchy in England was skewed.
I remember when I worked
You
at the
knew
New
what
Haven
you were
Register in
getting.
college in the early 80s. The owner didn't like certain demonstrations of political groups. They just weren't covered. Or when
Very
government,
good.
or the New York Times, which I love, I think is a great newspaper. I do believe it.
Mm-hmm.
They told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and then we went to war.
Yeah.
So I
And
guess.
thank you, Judith Miller. It sounded right.
Yeah, and her sources told her that. But so I guess I do disagree with you that they told the truth and now everybody's lying. I think it was a lot more complicated than that.
Oh no, I was lying. That was an attempt at humor. No, I don't think at any point. I've always cautioned against students or anyone going to one source and thinking this is it. This is handed down from God. You can't.
Yeah.
You need to always challenge your assumptions. And as an example, I am so far left, I scare me. I write a column that's allowed. But I try to challenge myself by reading people with whom I disagree on every level, including their use of the word "the." For one, it challenges me. Am I thinking clearly? And two, it gets my heart rate up, and it saves a gym membership.
And then you sort of
really
have to
do
look,
have to.
and you don't have to look for fake news on your doctor because your heart's beating just fine.
I could avoid my doctor visits.
Yeah,
It's
we're talking about fake news with Susan Campbell, who's been thinking a lot about it, teaching about it, writing about it, and she can be talking about it on Wednesday, February 20th at the New Haven Museum at 5:30 p.m. in an event called Fake News Citizens Arm Yourselves. I was interested when I was reading the promo for this event about how far back you went in the research, Susan. You talked about fake news when it really did happen in politics in 44 BCE. What was happening? So Jesus wasn't around yet, and people were still doing fake news. What was going on then?
Sure, Octavian wanted to smear Mark Antony, so he did, and he was pretty good at it. And he probably could have what he wrote could have translated easily to Twitter, short sound bites, 140 characters. You're in, you're out. There you go. And I'm fascinated with current history because my history is so much tied up with
Hartford Current, you're talking about. Yeah.
Hartford Current, excuse me. Thomas Jefferson sued the Current for libel. There was no libel. He was just based, and this is the man who said, if I had to choose between a government or newspaper, I would choose newspapers. Nevertheless, he ended up suing the Current for libel, mostly because he was tired of being what he thought slammed.
And what happened with that? What happened with that lawsuit?
They didn't win. He didn't win.
All right, go Current.
He lost. It went all the way to go Current. Go Lawyers.
So your point, I think, with those two examples, Susan, if I'm not mistaken, is that in one case with Mark Antony, fake news has existed for a long time when people deliberately put it out there, and that with the Jefferson lawsuit, that people, especially politicians, people in public life, will say fake news when they don't like the real news that's being reported.
Yes, exactly. Donald Trump is not a trendsetter there.
So you were alluding to Current being a Federalist paper, and sometimes people might wonder why our daily newspapers have names like Republican or American, or as the case of Waterbury, when they merged the Republican, American, or the Democrat. There were a lot of papers called Democrat in the South. And that's because newspapers, until our last century, traditionally were allied with one party, told the news from one point of view, and then readers got multiple newspapers and understood they were each coming from a perspective and went for the truth through the sort of John Stuart Mill conflict of ideas. You hear everybody put forward their truth, and then a larger truth emerges. You've been alluding throughout already this talk, Susan, this conversation about the need for civic literacy, about people getting sophisticated about how they get information on the web. Do you think that it's possible that in the 17 and 1800s, newspaper readers are more sophisticated than news consumers are today because they understood that there's no such thing as an unbiased reporter, and they went to multiple sources?
That's a great question. And yes, even if you go back and read old newspaper articles, they're fairly dense. And the way they were written, it was simple English. People who came to this country not speaking English often learned by reading newspapers, but the ideas were fairly complex. And the notion of unbiased coverage is relatively new. So yes, if you bought the Hartford Current, you knew what you were getting, and you needed to also read the American Mercury, or you needed to read the opposing view, and reading multiple newspapers in the course of a day was not that unusual.
Herbert Gans, a sociologist, did a study in the late 1900s about how this notion of objectivity arose. I know Mike Schutzen has a good book on this too. And it's sort of, the theory Gans had was that big corporations that were buying up all the newspapers decided what a whole bunch of views are that are safe to be considered objective, that wouldn't challenge their ability to make profit. And they sort of had to deal with the people in power, gave them all legal notices, and they, in politics. And so, like, capitalism good, socialism bad. What's good for General Motors is good for the country. If people are buying a lot of stuff at Christmas, that means we're a happier and better country. So there was this reaction, and it coincided with the rise of the web, that there is no objectivity. And what's been concerning for, I think, some of us, Susan, of our old-time reporters, I actually never believed there was objectivity. I worked in the alt weeklies, but I did believe there were facts and fairness, and that maybe there's been, with the explosion of fake news on the internet, the real goal, like Timothy Snyder suggests this about Vladimir Putin, and he thinks Trump's doing it too, is not as much to put fake news so that people will believe the fake story, but so people will believe there is no real news and they won't believe anything, and then power can't be held accountable. I wonder if a pendulum has swung back on that.
Well, that's a scary thought, but yes, I do. I think and there was a lot of discussion from the campaign on about Donald Trump tearing down institutions, Steve Bannon wanting to blow everything up. And, I'm not smart enough to think about what that meant, but I think what we are seeing is that there's always been distrust in the media, both the alt media and mainstream media, the media as a whole. It's abysmal. And when you have someone at the top, as we do, calling, fake news, enemy of the American people, things like that, that contributes a great deal, to the idea that there is no truth. Well, I'm not sure that's accurate. I'm not sure that there is no hard fact.
Mm-hmm.
It would be difficult to argue.
Yeah, that's true. And so then there were consequences. So one consequence, and I think the reason they did the series, I think the reason you, Susan Campbell, are speaking at the New Haven Museum next Wednesday is because there's this rise of fake stories that get put out on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in the Trump election. We see it now in every election in the world. We saw it in the midterm elections. That different from satire we saw at The Onion, let's say a place like that, or National Lampoon, where they want you to actually believe it's true. And then it gets passed along as a fact and people believe it's true. I was alluding in the intro to really a real nefarious one where this idea that Hillary Clinton was running a teenage sex slave operation at a pizzeria and somebody went and shot it up. Are people believing this stuff? And is it different? Here's the thing I always wonder. Is it different from right before the internet when lots more people read the National Enquirer than read the New York Times? A lot more people read stories, and then the Weekly World News, which is always my favorite because those guys actually did have fun. I love that one. Yeah. So, but they would say stuff, you know, that and you saw at National Enquirer in the last election, they make up that Hillary's about to die and things like that, and the sex scandals. And more people did see those stories, but one could argue that even though a fraction of those people read the New York Times, people are smarter than you think, and that the people who engage in political life understood what the real information was, and that one article in the New York Times had much more impact on what happened in our elections and in our government than a story read by 100 times more people at the supermarket and the Enquirer. And if you buy that, you might not. Then you could say that everything's just on steroids now. So now so many more people see the kind of articles that the National Enquirer because of fake news and bots and Russian and all that stuff. But a lot more people also read the New York Times. They now have 3 million just online subscribers and another million in print. So might it be true that we're getting too worried about fake news? Because, you know, social scientists have been studying it, as you know, because it's your field. And they have not had a definitive word on whether fake news swung the 2016 election or even had any impact on it, whether people cared or believed it. Any thoughts on that?
I think the role of social media can't be understated. So I agree, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the larger legacy media outlets are enjoying massive, despite Donald Trump's characterizations. They're not failing.
No, because of Donald Trump, not despite.
Well, it doesn't hurt. It also doesn't hurt in enrollment in journalism colleges. Thank you, Donald Trump. I agree that there's not been that bright line that can be drawn that, yes, the fake news swayed. You know, I think we have other concerns about how the 2016 election ended up the way it did. But with social media and the ease with which, you know, you can retweet, you can share on Facebook, I do think it's having more of an effect that maybe hasn't been measured yet. Does that make sense?
It does, because they shot up the pizzeria. So someone read that, you know, someone believed it, and they shot people because of it. So,
and I think an attack on a BBC reporter at last night's El Paso Trump rally, why would someone attack a reporter other than someone at the top saying these are enemies of the people?
No question. And that's a little bit different from, even though fake news is one of his charges, that's an old trick that Nixon and others had, try to turn people against the messenger in the press. But I want to make a challenging argument to you that I have to be honest, I don't necessarily believe. I believe this argument a lot at the dawn of the internet media age, and we started in the Independent 14 years ago, and it was so exciting that you could reach all these people and quickly in real time with the people holding you accountable. And that's that maybe the reason people don't believe news, fake news, is that big corporations that bought up all these local papers, put their competitors out of business in every city, took the profits out of their communities, did less real reporting, weren't connected, and they really just had contempt, and reporters weren't really connected to their communities, that's why people stopped reading and believing in local news and other news sources, and they and then that was just hastened by the internet. But that thanks to the internet, that while you can put in a fake story about a pizzeria, so many more people now can produce news and get real facts out there and get people to read it outside of big corporations that own traditional news outlets. And that this is actually a golden age for good information. And just like in the old days when more people read the National Enquirer, but good reporting in the New York Times and Washington Post still made more of an impact, could one argue that all the great reporting that's happening now in America and just isn't noticed by people who work at Legacy, dying and deserving to die in papers like the Hartford Courant. That so much good journalism's having. It's empowering
Wait,
communities.
Did you just say deserving to die?
Yes, I did say that. I think it's a self-inflicted wound.
You get that out of your mouth.
Okay, no, I believe it. These were
find
contemptible media organizations that had monopolies and raped communities without giving back and destroyed public trust. And I'm not talking about the individuals who wrote good articles. I'm talking about the companies that owned them. And I think there's been an opening for a great flowering of independent media on the web. And I agree with you. There's also been a flowering of fake news. It's not really flowering. But one can argue that just like in the old days when good reporting outweighed the impact of fake news, National Enquirer, everything's times 100 now. You have 100 times more fake news, but you also have 100 times more independent good news gathering going on that can have more of an impact in your community. Man, again, I said I don't totally believe that because I do think we're seeing evidence because of the scale of social media. But do you think there might be something to that critique that we're worrying too much about fake news rather than just the opportunities to do good news reporting?
I don't think we can ever worry too much about fake news. And let me put on my hypocritical hat right here. As someone who has had a great dental plan, great teeth, I bought a house, I've had a boat.
You do have great teeth. I'm looking at your picture.
I do have great teeth. Based on working for corporate media, you will never hear me say good things about corporate media. I disagree with your use of the word raping communities, that phrase, but
I'm talking economically raping communities.
It's a wonderful thing to lessen the people you have in the neighborhood based on your bottom line. You'll never hear me say anything like that. And Tribune and Trunk, I'm talking to you. And I do agree. And way back in the 90s, when we didn't even know what to call it, we called it citizen journalism. I've always believed that that's the way we're going to get the news.
I'm not even talking about citizen journalism because some of that ended up not working. It turned out citizens wanted real reporters.
Exactly. But
they want real reporters do the reporting.
No, I agree with your characterization that this opens up opportunities for other news outlets to fill the gap that has been woefully left by corporate media. I don't think it's a bad thing to focus on fake news at the same time.
I actually think it's an important thing. I told you I didn't totally believe that argument. I mean, there's no question that you destroy people's reputations and lives. I mean, I'm even thinking at the dawn of this era when Van Jones couldn't be appointed to the Obama administration because of fake news spread by Glenn Beck that he signed a petition he didn't sign. So, yeah, I'm not discounting the importance of looking at fake news. I was just trying to give you the counterfactual. So let's talk about that. We're talking to Susan Campbell about fake news, how citizens can arm themselves. She's going to be talking more in depth about this, and I suggest you go for a real interesting evening at the New Haven Museum, of which there are many interesting evenings. 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, February 20th. And that used to be the New Haven Colony Historical Society right there where Temple Street meets Grove. And
don't forget the porn ring down in the basement.
And the porn ring in the basement, yeah. I thought that was also a bookie operation with John Davenport. But anyway. So let's talk about remedies, Susan Campbell, because I found that very interesting that you're looking into that. So we talk about what should we do about fake news. And before I continue to interject my own opinions, I do want to hear yours. You're talking a lot about.
No, you know what? One day I want to sit on a corner and argue with you, and I don't even care what the topic is, and I don't care which side of the topic I'm assigned. I wanted to be in a debate club with you in high school, but you were nowhere to be found, and I didn't join it.
I didn't join any clubs, but the problem is that you will win every argument because once I listen to myself for more than 30 seconds, I think I'm full of it.
Oh, I have the opposite problem.
Okay.
Right.
So remedies. What should we do about fake news? You talked, I think you were really going toward news literacy, weren't you?
Yes, media literacy and knowing how to vet facts and going upstream to see where did this come from, who's the original source, questioning all the sources. Again, all these things you learn in journalism that you can do this. It's not terribly time consuming. Or if you don't feel like doing this for yourself, there are multiple websites that you can go to just to double check, did this really happen?
True or false, dead or alive. That's one of my favorites. I like that website.
Dead or alive?
Yeah, there's a dead site that you find out if someone's dead or not.
Have you ever looked into Snopes and the people who run Snopes?
You know, they got Snoped, didn't they? Didn't Snopes get Snoped about who they are? No?
No, they're just regular folks.
Yeah,
It's
and they
not like
fact check stuff.
PolitiFact
Yeah,
or,
that's true. That's kind of
factcheck.org.
skizzy.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think I would broaden the term news literacy that I threw out to you to civic literacy. I have felt now for a bunch of years that what a nonprofit needs to do. I've talked about Denise Merrill. She wants to do some of this, the Secretary of State, which is that how to be a citizen, because the internet has so many, with fake news and bad information, has so many
Right.
ways to depress citizen action or detoured from being productive. But there's also so many incredible opportunities. And I always thought there should be organizations devoted to going into senior centers, schools, training teachers, training kids in school, training seniors and others how to just find out information about your community, news media, government sources, which I would argue have become news media now, politicians and companies put out, and think tanks, and how to find good information and information on the web, not just the news stories, but how to look up zoning information, how to read public documents about how you look up who owns a company in the slum property in your neighborhood, and what the police department puts out. And I think there's such great opportunities to use the web now to be a more informed citizen, as an active citizen, if, as you point out, people know how to weed out bad information from good information.
That's a great idea. Are you involved with that with Denise Merrill?
No, I don't have enough time. Getting this, got to raise money to put out a news operation.
I'll tell you what, I would put time aside if you would, because I think that's actually the crux of it. Because people think of, as you said, if I want to find out who owns this property in my neighborhood, this blighted property, and then they stop. And so much is online now, and it's not that scary to go into a town hall, but people don't do it.
And town halls are increasingly on the web.
Happening.
And also what your neighbors are up to, so how to find out if there's going to be a meeting about a zoning change, what kind of stuff should go in your neighborhood, how to find out about it on the web, other citizens who are involved in it, when hearings are. I think there could be all sorts of seminars you do in schools about how to be a citizen on the net. And also, Sandra Day O'Connor is also using video games. She funded she helped start this whole nonprofit that's teaching about government, sort of like an update of Multiplication Rock when we were kids, how to use video games to start getting involved.
I can still sing the preamble. I think that would be a wonderful idea, and it would definitely spill over into the media, because then you would learn to vet that information by knowing how to use the web effectively.
And how to guide reporters, because what's been so fun for me, Susan Campbell, in the last 14 years is how much the readers jump on me as soon as I write articles now and show me what I got wrong and other places to take stories and where they take it. I feel like the role of a reporter has evolved, where our opinions don't matter anymore, even though we have them, because everyone could put their opinion out and show your bias, but that good fact gathering and analysis starts the conversation, and then readers could take it so much further than they used to, which is why I'm so much more optimistic.
That's one reason why the Independent remains, is because you're transparent. You're showing something that instills trust. You're not the sage on a stage. You're not handing information down from the mountain. You write a story and someone says, oh, by the way, Paul, this. And as opposed to, I'm not even going to answer that phone call because they're going to tell me I'm wrong. You incorporate it into the coverage. That's what everybody should be doing.
The most fun moment for me, that, Susan, was when we started doing the Independent in 2005. I went to cover a mayoral debate, and I read a headline. I covered the debate, and I wrote a headline slamming the mayor. It was like 10:50 p.m. 10:55 p.m., someone posted a comment saying, I hate the mayor, but what you just wrote in that headline was so unfair. There's nothing in your article that supports that. And I thought, and I looked, I said, that person was so right. So at 10:56, the headline changed, but we wrote, we changed the headline thanks to you. And they made so much better job. And I thought, but that's so freeing. Because there was this idea before corporate media was challenged by the new technology, is that we were sitting on high. And we did pronounce. And we did have an inflated sense of our importance. And we had a stake in being right. And now I think we just have a stake in being fair and working hard with information rather than being right.
I couldn't agree more. And we used to have a reader representative when I was at the Hartford Courant, and when he or she would call, I would take my time calling them back, because invariably someone had contacted them from outside and said, hey, Susan Campbell misspelled my name. Some basic journalistic, don't screw this up, but I did. And then as I got older, and even now, I hate making mistakes because I try so hard. Yeah. On the other hand, I accept that I will make mistakes, and and I've always felt this way, but I'm acting this way now. You have to correct things. Right?
Oh, yeah.
That's the very least you can do. So it's not like we're all in this together. Everyone help me write my column. But on the other hand, hey, if I made a mistake, then I'm going to accept that I made the mistake and
Yeah.
fix it. And the ego is removed. And it is very freeing. It's not like, hey, I can screw up as much as I want, but I'm going to still try to do my best.
Yeah.
But I am going to be transparent about it. So, yes, if I have to change a headline at 10:56, I will do so.
That was fun.
And then tell you why.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you,
Yeah.
Susan. So, Susan, well, I salute what you're doing with fake news and trying to inform people. And I urge everyone to go see you speak next week, Wednesday, February 20th at the New Haven Museum at 5:30 p.m. on fake news. I got to admit that I'm such an optimist about all this. I think fake news is real.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. We have to be armed on it, like you say. But what's so great is that I think the best way to fight fake news is with real news. It's just like fighting bad speech with more speech rather than trying to worrying about smothering the speech, because we can't smother the fake news. And that there's so many more opportunities now to do real news, freed from the fetters of corporate control, and with the addition of readers who keep us honest, that I actually think it's a great time to be taking on fake news. End of sermon.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so now I got to ask you before you go. You're not going to get out of here so easy. The Hartford Courant is organizing a union, reporters and editors, right? Where do you stand on that, and what do you think about that?
Absolutely, I support them in any way I can, because I was actually a part of a failed attempt in the 90s, and I credit my own bad leadership skills for that. But I think that a collective voice is imperative. It was then, and it is now.
So what happened in the 90s? What was this one? Times Mirror owned it, right? And there's still a corporation called Times Mirror?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember. It was
or was it Tribune? It might have been Tribune.
There was a situation where there was a restructuring of a section, and everybody was asked to reapply for their jobs except for the one man. And I and several other people are reading this on the bulletin board, said, how about that? So we started what we called the Women's Committee. Obviously, anyone was welcome. But it petered out, and I wish I could have figured out how to keep it going. Nevertheless, they're trying, and I would love to see them be a guild paper.
All right. Now, are you involved in that, or because you're not on staff? Are you on contract?
No, I'm freelancer. I would be happily involved in it if I was on staff.
That's editors and reporters?
I looked at the list, and to be honest, what I noticed, the people who signed on, I noticed mostly reporters, and forgive me, I'm not the best.
No, that's okay.
This is all kind of
so
new.
I'm with you, Susan Campbell. I think it's fantastic if they organize. I'm wondering if there's going to be more to organize for. So the business model is no longer working for these corporate print dailies. And I think there's a good chance, don't you, that they're going to be bought by the Hearst papers, which will then own all the dailies pretty much but the Waterbury Republican and the Norwich and New London papers in Connecticut, or what do you think?
That's the rumor, yeah. I've heard that rumor as well.
So I'm wondering what, obviously you need a union more than ever when you're going to have more cuts and manage the decline. I'm just wondering what the options are. Like if you were in charge of if you were one of the owners at Tronc or whatever they're calling that company now that owns the Courant, what would you do?
Like you're burping.
Oh,
I hate that name.
That was pretty funny. What would you do if you were trying to do the right thing and you knew that you can't pay the bills with the model you had? What would you do? And to put out real news at the Hartford Courant and pay as the owner. How would you put out real news and pay the bills with that model?
With the current model, I don't know how I would do it. They've been hemorrhaging money forever. I think there was a lack of insight on the internet early on, and they lost a lot of years thinking, oh, this is a passing thing. And this is me talking. I
remember that. I worked for an alt weekly that got destroyed, owned and destroyed by the Courant, where that happened. We tried to do the internet in the late 90s. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't have a business model to replace.
Well, I think part of the problem is being owned by a public company, because media companies used to be used to 30% return on profit. And that just ain't going to happen again. I do believe we're entering an era where people will pay for news. If you strip it down, you do it mostly online, you get creative and connected to communities. I think, like the New York Times, organizations can survive with local and regional news by putting out quality that's responsive to the community. But it's going to take a few painful years to get there.
That takes money to do that. I agree.
Yeah. So anyway, I've enjoyed talking to you so much, Susan. It would have been more fun in person, but
Yeah, I really appreciate your accommodating my chickenness, but I do.
You're not chicken. I would have felt so guilty if you came. I was starting to worry you'd get hit by some tractor trailer. It would have been all our fault.
You brought that up again, Paul.
I know.
Stop
I hate
talking
that
about
tractor trailer. Well, I didn't want to say it was going to be your fault as a driver. I was going to say it's the fault of the tractor
Oh,
trailer.
sure.
But there's not going to be any tractor trailer. Just like there's no bookie operation going on in the basement of the.
Or porn.
Yeah, or porn.
Okay.
Susan Campbell, what a delight to chat with you.
I'll see you in a corner somewhere. We'll argue.
Definitely, and you'll win within 30 seconds. But it is always a pleasure to read and speak with Susan Campbell of the Hartford Current, professor at University of New Haven. Everybody, next Wednesday night, in person, in reality, February 20th, at the New Haven Museum, 5:30 p.m., admissions free. You can hear Susan Campbell speak about fake news. Citizens, arm yourself. And thank you for Susan for chatting with us. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.